In Essential Task 3.5, we are going to begin a series of essential tasks that all try to identify what happens when you're in a group and how it affects your specific behavior. In the context of this essential task, we are going to be talking about sort of three separate concepts under the overall category of the impact of others. But as I alluded to, we are in the process of starting sort of three separate concept maps, essential tasks 3.5, 3.6, and 3.7, which all look under the broad classification of group behavior. But as I referenced, today we're only going to be talking about the impact of others. So we're doing the three boxes that you see here. I will transition back to the essential task, allow you to pause the video and copy down the yellow portion of the essential task. But as I referenced, we are going to be talking about how the impact of others can affect our behavior. And the first two terms that we're going to talk about, I've positioned side by side. If you want to put them on top of each other in your concept map, that's fine, but they're polar opposites of each other. That's why I like to look at them side by side. And they are the terms social facilitation and social inhibition. Each of these terms apply to your overall performance on a given task and how the presence of other people affect how well you perform that task. Social facilitation is a term that we use when your performance actually improves when you're in the presence of other people. So this can be athletics, this can be public speaking, this can be in any circumstance when you're in the presence of other people and you need to display a certain behavior, display a certain skill, perform some type of action. And with this concept, your performance actually increases. And this typically happens with tasks that you're already good at. So if you're really good at video games and now you have to play video games in front of a large crowd, if social facilitation were to take place, your performance would actually improve relative to being alone. This could be applicable to sports too. Maybe when you practice alone in the gym, you hit 70% of your free throws. However, in the presence of other people, your teammates, a crowd, the coaches, the refs, in the presence of a bunch of people, next thing you know, you realize you actually shoot about 85% during the game, and you question, well, why is it that I actually perform better around other people? It could very well be social facilitation, that some of the sort of physiological changes with things like heart rate and whatnot actually kind of put you in the zone. We'll talk more about that physiological aspect in a later unit with biology, but it basically puts you into the zone and enables you to perform at your peak. As a mnemonic, when I look at the term facilitation, the word facility kind of stands out to me, or at least the beginning of the word facility. And I kind of think about the idea of how most of the time professional sports teams and maybe even you yourself perform better in athletics or performance when you're really familiar with the environment. So it's kind of like that phenomenon of a home field advantage. Now, those two concepts aren't exactly the same, but I like to think about the idea how you perform better at home in front of your fans in order to remember that social facilitation is always about performing better in front of others. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be at your home stadium. I mean to make that point very clear. Social facilitation happens anytime you're in the presence of other people and your performance improves. At the other end of the spectrum is what we call social inhibition, when your performance decreases or weakens in the presence of other people. And it's typically with tasks that you consider difficult. So, for example, maybe you've been practicing how to play pool and you're not great at it, but you think you're getting better. And the next thing you know, you play pool with a bunch of friends and all of the practice that you put into it seemingly doesn't translate because now you're doing really poorly. People are watching the spotlights on you and your performance diminishes. Maybe perhaps this has happened with examples of public speaking where you've gone through your presentation, you think you have a good grasp of it, you can do it fairly well alone, but you're not really great at public speaking in the first place. And next thing you know, the lights are on, the teacher's watching, taking notes, grading you, your students in the room are evaluating you. And next thing you know, your public speaking seems to really weaken. That would be an example of social inhibition, where the presence of other people had sort of the reverse effect, where it actually diminished your overall performance. So typically you want to experience a lot of social facilitation. You want the presence of other people. You want to be sort of that game day player, as some students have used to recall this term, where the presence of other people actually overall improve your performance. Proceeding onward is a concept that we call de-individuation. And I would like you to watch starting at the 5-minute mark of the clip in the bottom left corner. It's really important to see this clip to understand de-individuation. It's really valuable to see an example. De-individuation occurs when you're part of a group and for one reason or another, sort of the overall arousal level or the excitement in that group begins to rise. Maybe you're amongst a bunch of rowdy sports fans Maybe you're in the midst of watching an athletic game and something really controversial happens on the field. And next thing you know, that heightened arousal and sort of that feeling of being anonymous translates into a loss of self-awareness and self-restraint. And now people begin to act out in ways which they wouldn't typically act out in individually. They begin to swear at the referees. They begin to push and shove one another. Maybe an entire riot ensues. De-individuation is essentially anytime you're in a group, kind of feel a little anonymous because you're blending in. There's some type of heightened arousal, some type of heightened anxiety level or whatever it might be. And next thing you know, things translate into borderline rioting or what we might call mob mentality. If you watch the clip in the bottom left corner, it's a famous clip from a basketball game from probably about 20 years ago now, approximately, maybe 15, 20 years ago. It was a game between the Indiana Pacers and the Detroit Pistons, two teams that at this point in time were big rivals of one another. And towards the end of the game, one player shoved another, and next thing you know, all heck broke loose. I'm talking about fans fighting players, players fighting fans, fans running onto the court, players running into the stands. I mean, it's really an unbelievable scene. And it all really started from that heightened arousal, that heightened intensity after two players sort of began pushing and shoving. One fan idiotically threw a beverage at one of the players, and next thing you know, de-individuation's happening all over the place, where these fans who wouldn't normally pick fights with professional athletes, blending into the crowd, start to feel anonymous. You see fans throwing things onto the court, throwing food at the players. I mean, it gets really intense. So it's only a few minutes to watch that clip in the bottom left corner, but it really encapsulates de-individuation well. You know, schools and teachers might have a really keen awareness of de-individuation. During athletic events here at the school, it's typical for teachers to supervise the fans because, you know, you're in a group of 40 other people, you feel a little anonymous, you might start saying things that are inappropriate towards the other team or towards their fans, and that's unacceptable. But in that circumstance, it's probably a degree of de-individuation where you start to say things you wouldn't normally say because you feel like you're anonymous in this crowd and maybe the environment of the game is getting a little hostile. Those are all examples of de-individuation. That's a big potential risk also during Halloween. Everyone's wearing a mask. You could see some people feeling really anonymous behind that mask and beginning to de-individuate. So if, you know, a school or something ran some type of holiday or Halloween party rather, you might be keenly aware of de-individuation and really warn students not to act irresponsibly. The last concept in this essential task is a concept called social loafing. It's a word I actually use quite frequently, and I'll start to use now that we're familiar with it. And it's probably a word you can begin to apply to your own experiences, particularly your academic experience and your work experiences. Social loafing occurs whenever an individual is in a group and is working towards a common goal. At that point, they have the tendency to work a little bit less than they would had they been evaluated or tested individually. So this is essentially the formal word of what happens in every group project, where all students are working towards the same common goal of a good grade. But there's sort of in the back of the mind the thought, somebody's going to do this. Somebody has to do this. I don't really need to put in much effort because this is going to get done anyway. Someone in the group in some way, shape, or form will complete this. And next thing you know, you kind of lose that sense of urgency where you as an individual end up giving less effort than you otherwise would have had you been assessed individually. So whenever there's that one person that basically does all the work in the group, everybody else in that group would qualify as a social loafer or exhibiting social loafing. So anytime you're working with somebody, whether that's at school or at work, and you feel like that other person is not doing their side, not picking up the slack, not contributing equally, you can call them out for social loafing. You know, for example, maybe when you go off into college, you're going to invite some friends or family members to help move your furniture and move your clothes and move your items. And you feel like there's just one person who's just not contributing their fair share. Well, that person is the social loafer in that situation. Everyone's working to the common goal of getting your stuff into your dorm. In theory, that should be divided up pretty equally. In theory, you're going to find a person or two who kind of works a little bit less. Why? Well, there's a common goal. Eventually, all that material is going to be brought into your dorm, regardless of whether or not you do 3 or 8 boxes. Well, that person who has that mindset is exhibiting social loafing.